Oakland, California, December 18, 1964. The backyard of a modest house on Broadway Street. Cold night air. 13 people standing in a loose circle, their breath visible in the darkness. At the center, two men face each other under a single floodlight that casts long shadows across the grass. One of them is Bruce Lee, 24 years old, lean, electric, with contained energy. The other is a man nearly twice his weight, a practitioner of a martial arts system that claims superiority over all others. What happened in that backyard would remain secret for over a decade. No cameras, no reporters, just witnesses who would later describe it as the most intense 3 minutes they'd ever seen. This wasn't a tournament. There were no rules, no referee, no trophy, just a challenge that threatened to destroy everything Bruce Lee was building in America. This is the story of the fight that changed Bruce Lee forever, and the lesson he learned in victory that would haunt him for the rest of his life. To understand why 13 people gathered in secret that December night, you need to understand who Bruce Lee was in 1964, and more importantly, who he was not. He was not yet a movie star. He was not yet a global icon. He was a martial arts instructor running a small school in Oakland's Chinatown, teaching a modified form of Wing Chun to a handful of students, most of them Caucasian, which was itself controversial. Bruce had arrived in America 4 years earlier with $100 in his pocket, a high school diploma from Hong Kong, and an unshakable belief that traditional martial arts were broken. That belief made him dangerous.
He moved with the speed of a tiger, striking only once. They say the mountains shook that day. We must be ready for such power.
In 1964, martial arts in America existed behind closed doors. Chinese kung fu schools operated under strict codes. You didn't teach outsiders. You didn't share secrets. You certainly didn't claim your style was better than another master's style, not publicly, not brazenly, not the way Bruce Lee did. But Bruce had watched traditional stylists spar, had tested their techniques, and found them wanting. Too rigid, too formal. Too obsessed with looking beautiful instead of being effective. He called his approach Jun Fan Gung Fu, Bruce Lee's Kung Fu. Later, it would evolve into Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. But in December 1964, it was simply heresy. Bruce had already made enemies. At the Long Beach International Karate Championships earlier that year, he'd given a demonstration that stunned the audience, his 1-inch punch, his speed, his precision. He moved unlike any martial artist anyone had seen, fluid where others were rigid, economical where others were elaborate. One of those audience members was a Hollywood hairdresser named Jay Sebring, who introduced Bruce to his client, a young actor named Steve McQueen. Another was karate champion Chuck Norris, who would become a lifelong friend. But in the traditional Chinese martial arts community, that demonstration wasn't innovation, it was betrayal. The Chinese martial arts establishment in San Francisco and Oakland operated under the authority of the Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association, the CCBA, sometimes called the Six Companies. They were the unofficial government of Chinatown, controlling businesses, resolving disputes, and enforcing cultural codes. And one of their unspoken rules was clear: do not teach kung fu to white people. Bruce Lee was breaking that rule openly. His students included Oakland students, housewives, businessmen, anyone who wanted to learn. He charged money, he advertised, he demonstrated on television. To the traditional masters, this wasn't just cultural betrayal, it was commercial competition. Then came the ultimatum. In late November 1964, a representative from the CCBA visited Bruce Lee's school on Broadway Street. The message was direct: stop teaching non-Chinese students or face the consequences. Bruce refused. The traditional masters weren't asking, they were demanding. And when Bruce continued teaching, they issued a formal challenge. If Bruce Lee lost the fight, he would close his school and never teach kung fu to non-Chinese students again. The challenge came from Wong Jack Man, a practitioner of Northern Shaolin kung fu who had recently arrived in San Francisco from Hong Kong. He was in his mid-20s, slightly older than Bruce, trained in classical forms and backed by the traditional martial arts community. Some accounts say Wong Jack Man volunteered for the challenge. Others suggest he was pressured by senior masters who wanted someone young and capable enough to defeat the upstart Bruce Lee. Regardless of how it happened, the challenge was formal, traditional, and binding. In Chinese martial arts culture, this kind of challenge, called a beimo, carried weight. It wasn't a friendly sparring match, it was a test of legitimacy. If Bruce lost, his reputation would be destroyed, his students would leave, his school would close. Everything he'd built in America, his dream of spreading a new way of thinking about martial arts, would end in a stranger's backyard. Bruce Lee agreed to the fight under one condition: it would be private. No crowd, no publicity, just witnesses from both sides to verify the outcome. The location was chosen carefully, the home of one of Bruce's students, a place where they could control who attended. The date, December 18, 1964, a Friday night after Bruce finished teaching his regular classes. 13 people would be present. Among them, Bruce's wife, Linda Lee, 8 months pregnant with their first child. James Yim Lee, Bruce's close friend and training partner, a welding expert and martial artist in his own right. Several of Bruce's students, and witnesses from Wong Jack Man's side, including practitioners from San Francisco's traditional kung fu schools. There would be no referee, no rounds, no point system. The fight would continue until one man quit, was knocked out, or was unable to continue. What none of them knew, what Bruce Lee himself didn't know, was that this fight wouldn't be his greatest triumph. It would be his greatest teacher. Wong Jack Man arrived in San Francisco in 1963, carrying with him the pedigree of classical Northern Shaolin Kung Fu. Unlike Bruce Lee's Wing Chun, a Southern style focused on close-range combat, rapid hand strikes, and efficiency, Northern Shaolin emphasized high kicks, acrobatic movements, long-range techniques, and forms that looked like martial choreography. It was beautiful, it was traditional. And its practitioners believed it represented the purest expression of Chinese martial philosophy. Wong Jack Man was not a brawler. He was a technician trained in the old way. Years of repetitive forms, conditioning, meditation, and philosophical study. In the traditional schools of Hong Kong and mainland China, martial arts weren't just about fighting, they were about discipline, respect for lineage, and preservation of cultural heritage. To people like Wong Jack Man, martial arts were art first, combat second. Bruce Lee represented everything Wong Jack Man was taught to oppose. Bruce stripped away the ritual, he questioned the forms. He sparred with boxers, wrestlers, judokas, anyone who could teach him something useful. He didn't care if a technique came from Wing Chun, Western boxing, or fencing. If it worked, he used it. If it didn't, he discarded it. This wasn't humility, it was arrogance in the eyes of the traditional establishment. Bruce Lee was saying, implicitly, that 500 years of Chinese martial tradition was inferior to his 4 years of experimentation. The challenge itself was steeped in cultural significance. In Chinese martial arts history, the Beimo, a formal challenge match, was how legitimacy was established. If a new teacher wanted to open a school, they might be challenged by the established masters. If a student believed their style was superior, they might issue a challenge to prove it. These matches were private, serious, and sometimes brutal. But they followed rules, unspoken cultural rules. Wong Jack Man and the traditional masters expected Bruce Lee to understand those rules. The fight would be controlled, technical, a demonstration of skill rather than a street brawl. There would be respect, restraint, a recognition that this was about honor, not violence. Bruce Lee didn't agree to those rules. As far as he was concerned, a fight was a fight. If Wong Jack Man wanted to test him, it would be a real test. No pulled punches, no theatrical forms, no pretending this was a friendly demonstration. To understand the stakes, you need to understand what was really being tested that night. This wasn't just Bruce Lee versus Wong Jack Man. It was two philosophies in direct confrontation. Traditional martial arts, preservation, lineage, respect for masters, forms refined over centuries. The belief that true martial arts required years of discipline, repetition, and spiritual cultivation. Combat ability was secondary to character development. Bruce Lee's philosophy, adaptation, individualism, pragmatism, the belief that martial arts should be judged by one criterion: does it work in a real fight? If a technique was beautiful but ineffective, it was useless. If a principle was ancient but impractical, it should be abandoned. In Bruce Lee's own words from a later interview, "I have not invented a new style, composite, modified, or otherwise. I have merely discovered a new way, one that is constantly changing and adapting. Any technique, however worthy and desirable, becomes a disease when the mind is obsessed with it." But in December 1964, Bruce hadn't yet fully articulated this philosophy. He was still developing it, testing it, refining it. The fight with Wong Jack Man would be a crucible, a moment that would force him to confront the limits of his own abilities. The rules, or lack thereof, were negotiated in the days before the fight. According to Linda Lee, Bruce's wife, Wong Jack Man's representatives wanted specific restrictions. No eye strikes, no groin strikes, no throws. Bruce refused. He said if they were going to fight, it would be a real fight, no artificial limitations. There are conflicting accounts of whether an agreement was reached. Some witnesses claim both men agreed to no serious injury. Others say there were no rules at all. What's clear is that both men understood the stakes. The loser's reputation would be destroyed. Wong Jack Man had the backing of the traditional establishment. If he won, Bruce Lee would be humiliated, forced to stop teaching non-Chinese students, and likely driven out of the Bay Area martial arts community. Bruce Lee had everything to lose: his school, his students, his credibility, and perhaps most importantly, his belief in his own system. If traditional kung fu could defeat him, then maybe his 4 years of experimentation were wrong. Maybe the old masters were right. Neither man could afford to lose. Before we step into that backyard, we need to understand what made Bruce Lee's approach so radical and why it threatened the martial arts establishment so deeply. Traditional martial arts in the 1960s were taught through forms, prearranged sequences of movements called kata in Japanese systems or taolu in Chinese kung fu. Students would spend years perfecting these forms, practicing the same movements thousands of times until they became second nature. The idea was that the forms contained all the principles of combat, encoded in choreography. Master the form and you'd master the fight. Bruce Lee thought this was backwards. He believed forms were useful for beginners, a way to develop basic coordination, balance, and muscle memory. But he saw students who could perform beautiful forms yet couldn't fight. They trained their bodies to move in preset patterns, but when faced with an unpredictable opponent, they froze. Their techniques were sharp in the air but useless against resistance. Bruce's approach was different. He emphasized aliveness, training that simulated real combat, sparring, pad work, reaction drills. He studied how people actually fought when the adrenaline kicked in, when there was no script, no choreography, just two people trying to hit each other without getting hit. This led him to several conclusions that were heretical in 1964. 1. Classical stances were too rigid. The deep, wide stances of traditional kung fu looked powerful but were slow and immobile. Bruce adopted a more upright, mobile stance borrowed from fencing and boxing, what would later become the Jeet Kune Do Bai Zhang stance. It allowed faster footwork, quicker entries and exits. 2. High kicks were beautiful but impractical. Traditional Northern Shaolin practitioners like Wong Jack Man trained spectacular jumping kicks and spinning techniques. Bruce believed these were too slow, too telegraphed, too easy to counter. He preferred low kicks to the knee, the shin, the thigh, unglamorous but effective. 3. Blocking was inferior to intercepting. Most martial arts taught defensive blocks: use your arm to stop an incoming strike. Bruce believed this was reactive and wasted time. Better to intercept the attack at its source, hitting your opponent's arm before the strike fully developed, or better yet, hitting your opponent while they were preparing to strike. Intercept the fist before it becomes a fist, he would later say. 4. Simplicity beat complexity. Traditional stylists prided themselves on vast arsenals of techniques, hundreds of strikes, kicks, throws, and locks. Bruce believed most of these were redundant. He wanted a small set of highly refined, versatile techniques that could be applied in multiple situations. "I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once," he famously said, "but I fear the man who has practiced one kick 10,000 times." This wasn't just a technical disagreement, it was philosophical. Traditional martial arts were about preservation, maintaining the wisdom of the past. Bruce Lee was about evolution, adapting to new challenges, new contexts, new opponents. In his personal notes from this period, Bruce wrote, "The great mistake is to anticipate the outcome of the engagement. You ought not to be thinking of whether it ends in victory or defeat. Let nature take its course and your tools will strike at the right moment." This was influenced by his reading of Taoism, Zen Buddhism, and Western philosophy, particularly Jiddu Krishnamurti's ideas about freedom from conditioning. Bruce was trying to create a martial art that wasn't a martial art, a system that had no fixed system, a style that adapted to the individual rather than forcing the individual to adapt to the style. But here's the paradox. In December 1964, Bruce Lee was still heavily reliant on Wing Chun. His footwork was evolving, his philosophy was forming, but his core techniques, the chain punches, the trapping hands, the centerline theory, were all Wing Chun. He'd studied under IP Man in Hong Kong for 5 years, and those techniques were deeply ingrained. Wing Chun is a close-range system designed for tight spaces, narrow Hong Kong alleyways, crowded markets. It emphasizes rapid hand strikes, sensitivity to an opponent's energy through Kai Sao or sticky hands training, and simultaneous attack and defense. It's efficient and direct. But it had weaknesses. Wing Chun practitioners typically didn't train much ground fighting. They didn't emphasize footwork and mobility the way boxers did, and they weren't accustomed to fighting opponents with significantly longer reach, which would be a problem if Wong Jack Man kept his distance and used the long-range kicks of Northern Shaolin. Bruce had trained his students to think critically about their techniques. One of his favorite drills was attribute training, developing speed, timing, power, and adaptability independent of specific techniques. He'd studied biomechanics, reading books on fencing, Western boxing, and even anatomy. He understood leverage, angles, kinetic chains. But theory is not experience, and on December 18, 1964, Bruce Lee was about to get an education. One more thing you need to know, Bruce Lee was not a large man. He stood 5'7" and weighed approximately 135 pounds in 1964. He was lean, wiry, fast, but not physically imposing. Wong Jack Man was slightly taller and heavier, probably 155–160 pounds. Both men were smaller than modern UFC fighters, but in the context of 1960s martial arts, they were representative. Martial arts weren't about size, they were about technique, speed, and skill. Or so the theory went. What Bruce understood even then was that size did matter, but it wasn't everything. A larger, stronger opponent had advantages, but those advantages could be neutralized with better timing, better angles, better strategy. The fight was as much mental as physical. And Bruce Lee was, above all else, a strategist. December 18, 1964, early evening, Oakland, California. Bruce finished teaching his regular Friday class at his Broadway Street school. His students noticed he was quieter than usual, more focused. Linda, 8 months pregnant, knew something was different. Bruce had told her about the challenge days earlier. She was worried, not that he would lose, but about what would happen if he won. Would there be retaliation? Would the traditional masters send someone else? James Yim Lee arrived at the school around 6:00 p.m. James was a welder by trade, a martial artist by passion, and Bruce's closest friend in Oakland. He was older than Bruce, in his 40s, stocky, strong, with a pragmatic approach to fighting. He'd helped Bruce set up the school, built training equipment, and served as a training partner. If anyone understood the stakes of this fight, it was James. Together, they drove to the house on Broadway Street where the fight would take place. It belonged to one of Bruce's students. The backyard was small, maybe 30 feet by 40 feet, bordered by a wooden fence. A single floodlight had been set up, folding chairs for the witnesses. No mats, no padding, just grass and concrete patio. Wong Jack Man arrived with his group around 7:00 p.m. He was accompanied by several practitioners from San Francisco's Kung Fu schools, witnesses to verify the outcome. Accounts differ on the exact number, but most agree there were 13 people total. Some sources say 14 or 15, but the most consistent number from those who were there is 13. There was tension in the air, but it wasn't hostile, not yet. Formal, respectful, like two duelists meeting at dawn. In Chinese culture, saving face is paramount. Both men understood that this fight would end with one man's reputation damaged. The goal was to minimize humiliation while establishing dominance. Linda Lee later described the atmosphere. It was very quiet. Everyone was polite, but you could feel the weight of it. This wasn't a game. Bruce changed into a black t-shirt and loose pants. Wong Jack Man wore traditional Kung Fu clothing, loose-fitting, designed for mobility. They stretched separately. No one spoke much. The witnesses took their positions around the backyard perimeter. James Yim Lee stood near Bruce, arms crossed. He'd seen Bruce spar dozens of times, had trained with him, knew his capabilities. But this was different. This wasn't training. There was no stopping if someone got hurt. What happened next is disputed. Multiple witnesses, multiple accounts, shaped by perspective and allegiance. But certain facts are undisputed. The fight happened, it was private, 13 people saw it, and it changed Bruce Lee. Before they began, there was a brief conversation conducted in Cantonese about the rules. According to Linda Lee's later account, Wong Jack Man wanted to confirm there would be no killing, no maiming, no serious injury. Bruce allegedly replied in English for Linda's benefit, "I'll try not to hurt him badly." That response tells you everything about Bruce's mindset. He wasn't entering this as a respectful sparring match. He was entering it as a fight. Wong Jack Man may have expected a technical demonstration, a test of skill, forms, precision. Bruce Lee was preparing for a street fight. The two men faced each other in the center of the backyard. The floodlight cast harsh shadows, 13 people watching in silence. Cold December air, no music, no announcer, no ceremony. Just two men and a question, whose philosophy would survive? And then Wong Jack Man spoke. In Cantonese, directed at Bruce but loud enough for the witnesses to hear, he said something that, depending on which account you trust, was either a formal declaration of the challenge or a subtle insult about Bruce teaching foreigners. The exact words are lost to history. What matters is Bruce's reaction. He didn't respond verbally, he didn't posture, he didn't argue. Bruce Lee looked at Wong Jack Man, nodded once, and settled into his stance. The fight was about to begin. No referee said go, no bell rang. The fight began the way real fights begin, with a sudden shift in energy. Bruce moved first. He closed the distance with a burst of footwork, trying to enter Wong Jack Man's range before he could deploy the long-range kicks of Northern Shaolin. Bruce's strategy was obvious to those who understood Wing Chun: get close, control the center line, overwhelm with rapid hand strikes. Don't let Wong Jack Man establish the distance where his style had the advantage. But Wong Jack Man didn't engage the way Bruce expected. He retreated, circled, used footwork to maintain distance. Wong Jack Man wasn't interested in trading blows at close range. He knew that was Bruce's strength. Northern Shaolin was a mobile style designed to control space and dictate the range of engagement. Wong Jack Man kept moving, keeping Bruce at bay, occasionally throwing front kicks to disrupt Bruce's entries. This frustrated Bruce. According to multiple witnesses, the first 30 seconds were a cat-and-mouse game, Bruce advancing, Wong Jack Man retreating, neither landing significant strikes. The backyard was small, but it was large enough for Wong Jack Man to circle, reset, evade. Bruce's students watched, confused. They'd seen Bruce dominate sparring sessions, overwhelming opponents with speed and precision, but Wong Jack Man wasn't cooperating. He wasn't standing still. He wasn't engaging in the close-range exchange where Wing Chun thrived. Linda Lee later described it. Bruce kept moving forward, but the other man kept backing up, moving around. It was like he didn't want to fight. But Wong Jack Man was fighting, just not the way Bruce expected. He was using space as a weapon. Every retreat, every circle was forcing Bruce to chase, to expend energy, to close the distance repeatedly. Then Bruce changed tactics. He stopped chasing. He cut off the angles, used his footwork to limit Wong Jack Man's escape routes, forced him toward the fence, herded him like a predator cornering prey, and when Wong Jack Man's back was near the fence, Bruce exploded forward. A rapid combination, left jab, right cross, chain punches to the head and body. Bruce's hands moved in a blur, the distinctive Wing Chun straight punches fired from the center line, one after another, relentless. Wong Jack Man raised his guard, absorbed some strikes, deflected others, tried to create space. But Bruce was inside now. This was his range. He threw a low kick to Wong Jack Man's lead leg, not a traditional Wing Chun technique, but something he'd adapted from Thai boxing and Western kickboxing. Wong Jack Man stumbled slightly, his stance disrupted. Bruce pressed the advantage, more chain punches. A trapped hand, Bruce caught Wong Jack Man's arm, controlled it, struck with his free hand. Wong Jack Man twisted, tried to pull away. And then something happened that witnesses described in different ways, but all agreed on the result. Wong Jack Man either tripped, was swept, or lost his balance during the exchange. He fell. Bruce followed him to the ground. This was not traditional kung fu. Neither Wing Chun nor Northern Shaolin emphasized ground fighting. This was decades before Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu became mainstream, before mixed martial arts taught every fighter that 30% of fights end up on the ground. But Bruce's instincts took over. He mounted Wong Jack Man, established a position of control, and began striking. Wong Jack Man covered his head, tried to roll, tried to escape. Bruce hit him multiple strikes to the head and body, not full power, but hard enough to make the point. According to Linda Lee, Bruce grabbed Wong Jack Man's hair at one point, pulled his head back, and prepared to strike his exposed face. It was at this moment that several witnesses, exactly who depends on the account, shouted to stop the fight. "That's enough," someone yelled. In Cantonese, someone else shouted, "He's done." Bruce hesitated. Wong Jack Man was still moving, still conscious, but he wasn't fighting back. He was defending, covering, trying to protect himself. James Yim Lee later said Bruce could have kept going, but he stopped. He'd made his point. Bruce stood up. Wong Jack Man rolled away, got to his feet. His traditional kung fu clothing was grass-stained and disheveled. According to some accounts, there was blood on his face, a cut lip or bloody nose. Other accounts say there was no blood, just exhaustion and humiliation. The entire fight had lasted approximately 3 minutes. Some witnesses said it was shorter, 90 seconds. Others insisted it was longer, 4 or 5 minutes. The discrepancy is typical of eyewitness accounts, especially in high-stress situations, but most agree on the time frame, under 3 minutes. 3 minutes that felt like an eternity. Bruce was breathing hard, not from exhaustion, but from adrenaline. He looked at Wong Jack Man, who wouldn't meet his eyes, looked at the witnesses from the San Francisco schools, who stood silent. No one challenged the outcome. What happened next depends on whose account you trust. Linda Lee said Wong Jack Man and his group left immediately. No handshake, no formal acknowledgement, just a quiet exit. They got in their cars and drove back to San Francisco. Other accounts suggest there was a brief exchange, Wong Jack Man saying something like, "You're very good," and Bruce responding, "You too," a minimal gesture towards saving face. But the result was undeniable. Bruce Lee had won. The witnesses from Bruce's school were elated. They clapped, congratulated him, talked excitedly about what they'd seen. Bruce had defended his school, his students, his right to teach. The traditional establishment had challenged him, and he'd answered. But Bruce Lee wasn't celebrating. He walked to the edge of the backyard, away from the group. Linda noticed. So did James Yim Lee. Bruce stood there, hands on his hips, staring at nothing. Linda approached him. "What's wrong? You won." Bruce turned to her, and she later described the look on his face. Not pride, not satisfaction, but frustration. "I should have finished him in 30 seconds, Bruce said. "It took too long, my conditioning is terrible, and he kept getting away, I couldn't catch him." James Yim Lee overheard, "Bruce, you won, that's what matters." But Bruce shook his head. "That's not the point, I wasn't good enough, I got tired, my hands hurt, and if he'd been better, if he'd been more aggressive, I might have been in trouble." This reaction confused his students. They just watched him dominate an opponent, win a high-stakes challenge fight, defend his school's honor. But Bruce wasn't seeing victory, he was seeing his own limitations. Later, in private conversations with James and Linda, Bruce elaborated on what bothered him. 1. His cardiovascular conditioning was inadequate. 3 minutes of fighting and he was breathing hard. What if the fight had gone longer? What if there had been multiple opponents? 2. His techniques were too complex. The Wing Chun trapping hands worked, but they required too much precision, too much setup. Against a moving, retreating opponent, they were harder to land. 3. His power was insufficient. He'd landed multiple clean strikes, but Wong Jack Man kept moving, kept resisting. Bruce wanted one strike stopping power. In the days following the fight, Bruce began a radical transformation of his training. He started running miles every morning to build cardiovascular endurance. He began lifting weights, which was controversial in martial arts circles at the time. Traditional belief held that weight training made you slow and muscle-bound. He experimented with power generation techniques from Western boxing, studying how boxers like Jack Dempsey and Joe Louis generated knockout force. And most significantly, he began questioning everything about Wing Chun. The fight with Wong Jack Man was never publicly reported. Both sides had reasons to keep it quiet. The traditional kung fu schools didn't want to advertise that their representative had lost. Bruce didn't want to appear boastful or attract more challenges. But word spread through the martial arts community. Students talked. Witnesses shared stories. Within weeks, everyone in Bay Area martial arts circles knew Bruce Lee had fought Wong Jack Man and won. No more formal challenges came. The traditional masters tacitly accepted that Bruce could continue teaching non-Chinese students. He'd proven himself according to their own cultural rules, the Beimo, the challenge match. They didn't like it, but they respected it. But the real impact of the fight wasn't external, it was internal. It fundamentally changed Bruce Lee's approach to martial arts. In the months following December 1964, Bruce became obsessed with efficiency, practicality, and functionality. He began stripping away techniques that looked impressive but didn't work under pressure. He started training with people from other disciplines, judokas, boxers, karate practitioners, wrestlers, testing his techniques against different styles. His friend and student Dan Inosanto later said, "That fight was a turning point. Before that, Bruce was still very Wing Chun. After that, he became Bruce Lee." By 1966, Bruce moved to Los Angeles, opened a new school, and began developing what he initially called non-classical Gung Fu, a martial art defined by its rejection of classical forms and rigid systems. He read voraciously: philosophy, psychology, biomechanics, fencing manuals, boxing texts. He filled notebooks with observations, diagrams, training regimens. The philosophy that would become Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist, was born from the frustration he felt in that Oakland backyard. In his personal notes from 1967, Bruce wrote, "Jeet Kune Do favors formlessness so that it can assume all forms, and since it has no style, it can fit in with all styles. As a result, Jeet Kune Do utilizes all ways and is bound by none, and likewise uses any technique or means which serves its end." The fight also changed Bruce's teaching philosophy. He became less interested in preserving techniques and more interested in developing fighters. He stopped teaching set forms and started teaching principles: timing, distance, rhythm, adaptability. Every student's Jeet Kune Do would look slightly different because it was tailored to their body type, reflexes, and temperament. "Absorb what is useful, discard what is not, add what is uniquely your own," he would tell his students. That phrase became the core principle of Jeet Kune Do, and it came directly from his experience fighting Wong Jack Man. Years later, in the 1970s, when Bruce was an international film star, journalists would occasionally ask him about the fight. He was always careful in his responses. He never boasted. He never disrespected Wong Jack Man. Instead, he focused on what he learned. In one interview, he said, "A good fight should be like a small play, but played seriously. When the opponent expands, I contract. When he contracts, I expand. And when there is an opportunity I do not hit, it hits all by itself." That philosophy, the idea that fighting should be natural, intuitive, effortless, came from realizing how much effort the Wong Jack Man fight had required. Bruce wanted to transcend effort, to reach a state where technique became reflex, where thinking and doing were one. So what can we learn from a 3-minute fight that happened 60 years ago in an Oakland backyard? The obvious lesson is about testing your beliefs. Bruce Lee thought his approach was superior to traditional martial arts, but until he fought Wong Jack Man, it was just theory. The fight forced him to confront reality, and reality revealed gaps in his training. Most people avoid those moments of confrontation because they fear failure. Bruce embraced it, learned from it, and became better. But there's a deeper lesson. Bruce Lee won the fight but learned more from his victory than most people learn from defeat. Think about that. He achieved his goal, defended his school, proved his legitimacy, silenced his critics. But instead of celebrating, he immediately focused on his weaknesses. Most people, when they win, use victory as confirmation that they're on the right path. Bruce used victory as a diagnostic tool to find what still needed improvement. This is what separated Bruce Lee from his contemporaries. He wasn't interested in being right, he was interested in being better. And being better required constant self-critique, constant evolution, constant willingness to discard what no longer served him. In his philosophical writings, Bruce cited Jiddu Krishnamurti, the Indian philosopher who rejected all systems and dogmas. The highest form of intelligence is observing without evaluating. Bruce applied this to martial arts: observe what works, discard judgment about what should work according to tradition, and adapt. The fight with Wong Jack Man taught Bruce that tradition wasn't wrong because it was old, it was limiting because it was rigid. And his own approach wasn't right because it was new, it was effective because it was adaptable. Jeet Kune Do, the system that emerged from that December night, is paradoxical. It's a martial art that rejects being a martial art. It's a style that has no style. It's a philosophy that teaches you to discard philosophy. As Bruce wrote in his notes, having no way is way, having no limitation as limitation. In your own life, this lesson applies beyond fighting. Whatever field you're in, business, art, relationships, learning, the danger isn't failing. The danger is succeeding without questioning your success. Bruce Lee won a fight and asked, "Why wasn't I better? How could I have done this more efficiently? What did this victory reveal about my limitations?" That mindset, using success as a lens to see your weaknesses, is rare. Most of us use success as a shield to hide from our weaknesses. One final thought: Bruce never publicly humiliated Wong Jack Man. He could have. He could have bragged, could have turned the fight into a marketing tool for his school. But he didn't. He kept it private out of respect for the cultural tradition of the Beimo and out of recognition that Wong Jack Man was a practitioner doing what he believed was right. Bruce Lee fought fiercely but honored his opponent. That's the mark of a true martial artist, not the ability to defeat an enemy, but the wisdom to know that yesterday's opponent might be tomorrow's teacher. Oakland, California, December 18, 1964. 13 people witnessed a fight that lasted 3 minutes. No cameras, no trophies, no fame. Just a young martial artist defending his right to teach, and in victory, discovering how much more he had to learn. Bruce Lee would go on to revolutionize martial arts, inspire millions, and become a global icon. But he carried the lesson of that backyard fight with him for the rest of his life. Every victory is incomplete, every answer raises new questions, and the path of mastery is never finished. The traditional masters wanted to stop him from teaching. Instead, they gave him the greatest lesson of his career. Sometimes the fights we think will destroy us are the ones that remake us. What would you do if victory revealed more problems than it solved?